Since the dawn of written history, there's always been a few explorers and individuals who found an island that no one else could find. But how true are these accounts? And are there any islands, towns, or countries which don't exist, but we actually think do exist? Join us today as we pack our luggage and whip out our trusty earmarked maps as we explore 4 of our favorite stories of phantom islands, countries, and towns. And before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Less than 10% of listeners are subscribed to our accounts, and it only takes a second to do so. We appreciate any support. Thanks. So, welcome back, everybody, to, I believe it's episode number 10 of this beautiful conspiratorial podcasty home of ours. But my name's Simon, and I'm joined with some of my friends who are maybe not as conspiratorial minded as me. Han, do you want to introduce yourself and your current predicaments?
Well, maybe not conspiratorial minded. Sometimes. Well, I'm currently set at home with the pandemic raging in my body, so I guess that's happening. So if I sound a bit hoarse, that's why.
Well, I always say, Han, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So expect a strong output today, right?
I'm pretty sure. I read a paper. I read like a stupid article around somewhere that my brain is shrinking because of COVID now. So I don't think I'm going to be stronger. It's only going to weaken me.
Oh. Well, I mean, talking to somebody whose brain is never shrinking. Felix, do you want to introduce who you are and what you're bringing here today?
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Han, for introducing me. It's going to be similar to Han. I've got the flu. Not yet confirmed COVID. Tomorrow we'll see. But great and glad to be back on one of the podcasts. In 2022.
Yeah, the glorious year, you know. Tell the kind people who are listening in, who are you, Felix? What do you bring to this podcast? What are you doing right now in life?
So after finishing my studies of IR, just like Simon and Han almost, looking for interesting new opportunities to get involved with, or in other words, the career market. So that's mainly the last couple of weeks that I've been looking into. And next to it, I've been doing lots of holidays. I really enjoyed my holidays the last couple of weeks. So what would I bring to this podcast? I think the realistic view. Yeah, I'm really realistic. I'm not that optimistic like Simon. So for that sense, I'm looking forward to get surprised. Perhaps you will make me optimistic or even perhaps more pessimistic these days.
Maybe. I mean, I do say, Han, and I think you confirm this. Every episode I say, I'm going to convince you that this theory is true. And I have a pretty good track record, right? I got to say so, right?
Well, I mean, it's not the worst track record. I feel like you've got a pretty good track record on me because I'm very impressionable. But so the rest of the guests is kind of 50-50, right? Sometimes we have people who do actually kind of go along with it. And sometimes we got, well, more of the straight wood kind of type.
Yeah. Well, without much further ado, I want to, get into the meat of our topic a little bit. But I always like to butter up our guests a little bit, to put a little tension, to dip them into the conspiratorial world. And we do this by, more relatable kind of question. And Felix, part of the reason I invited you on here today is because you are somewhat of a traveler to mysterious and exotic locales of recent past. What's some of the more, unknown locations you've been to that we might not know about?
Probably one of the last places I've been to. There was the Seychelles. The Seychelles next to the Maldives and Mauritius on the east side of Africa. That's quite I have to say, an interesting, mystical place, which I have to say a lot of Russians are going over there and other people who really want to kind of find this hidden gem. So I would probably say that island of those islands, the Seychelles, is actually quite of a hidden place that not many people have heard about or would have think about going on holiday. Perhaps mainly because when people think of the Maldives, they already think of those lovely hotels or bungalows in the water, in the ocean with a private pool and all stuff like that. But the Seychelles, you could probably find those kind of stuff. But it's really more, let's say, both feet on the ground. It's a whole different story. So you could find your own private island, private mansion, but you can also find a small bungalow for only €50 a night. So that's something I would probably name as something other people haven't been to, haven't thought about it.
What about you, Han? Do you have any similar? Because I mean, you've traveled a little bit. You went to Hamburg recently, right? Any locations you've been to that maybe I wouldn't know
It's not
about?
going to be Hamburg. Well, I guess the most remote place I visited was Myanmar, which, due to sad reasons, is no longer visitable at this point. So
Hmm.
I guess it would be it. Other than that, I haven't really been to really crazy places. I mean, places like Egypt, I feel like that's not that crazy. That's like people go there.
See, what I'm kind of trying to lead us towards is, Felix, do you believe that any places exist which technically don't exist?
Uh, the, as an example, I have to think of Area 51 or something like that.
Maybe. I mean, the classic go-to example is Atlantis, and we're not going to talk about
Wow.
Atlantis today, but I mean, those kind of mythical locales which there's evidence for, but some people, some
Yeah.
of those unbelievers, they don't believe in that evidence.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've heard the stories. I've never really, well, as a child, perhaps I would have fantasized about it, but I think the last moment I probably would have thought about a place like that would be after watching Aquaman or a movie with Area 51.
Well, how about places that do technically exist on the map but don't in reality? Ever thought about that?
No, I haven't been thinking about that a lot. No, but I get your point.
So, what we're getting at is today we're going to introduce you to some new travel locations, which you should totally go visit if you can find them, which is going to be a lot harder than it appears. So, mainly what we're going to be talking about is Phantom Islands or other similar exotic locations or just locations which people think exist but actually don't exist. So, what we have planned for today is between us, we have five of these locations, and we're going to each present a few of them. And on each of them, we're going to let you, Felix, make a final verdict. First, are they worth visiting? And second, do you think you can actually find them? And that's what we're going to be looking at here today.
Okay, lovely. I'm looking forward to it. So 5 places.
Yeah. I think we have five, or time for five. Maybe we'll cut one out if we go a bit too long, but
We'll
maybe
see.
it'll be a bonus episode. We'll see.
I do have to go to bed. Yeah, all right. That's why I have to go to bed early.
Yeah. No. And I will say to the viewers, be kind to Han because his poor COVID-stricken state is not making.
That's horrible. Oh my god, my voice is terrible.
No, don't worry about it, man. I never worry about my voice, and it always sounds good. So,
That's true. Right.
okay, yeah. Han, should we start with one of your locations and go from there?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. So, has anyone of you ever been to Mexico?
No.
I have not.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna have to go be there, Simon. You're North American.
I don't consider Mexico as part of North America.
Oh,
Ooh.
but it's the one place that all Americans go to on holiday, right?
No, we go to Florida.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, there's Disney World there. We all go to Florida. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, this just confirms my image of you people. Anyway, sorry to all the listeners from North America. I'm being really mean. Anyway, as you know, Mexico is a country which is right next to a very big body of water, which is covered in a bunch of islands that were gradually discovered just after the rediscovery of the Americas. And well, it's a big body of water, and a lot of people had to make maps on that. So they did that gradually along like the centuries. So from the 16th to 20th century, a lot of people took boats and made maps on it. But sometimes some of these islands are slightly less corroborated, and one of these islands is the one that we're looking at now on these two maps. So it's called the Islote Bermeja, and I'm butchering that, I know. Have you ever heard of that, either of you?
I have not because I try to avoid Spanish like the plague, which it was one day. So
I think the coast area is kind of known because of colonial time and gold. but nothing more than that.
Right. So, like I said, there were a bunch of little islands around this coast, and they mapped them out and they put them on a map, but not a lot of people actually visited them because a bunch of them were just rocks in the middle of the ocean, just very tiny, teeny little dots. One of these islands that nobody bothered to verify for a long time was called Isla de Bermeja. And this island was on maps until, I think, begin 20th century. It was just there on most maps. And then at some point, they just forgot about it and didn't care about it until at one point it became relevant again. Because, as you might know, the Gulf of Mexico is filled with a bunch of oil. And one of these places called the, do I do the Spanish one? It's called the Donut Holes in English. I'm not going to try that. So this place called the Donut Holes is a lot of oil. And there was a bit of a dispute in 1997 between the US and Mexico about who gets the rights to exploit this oil. Mexico looked at a bunch of old maps and realized, wait, there's this island on these maps. And if that island is actually there, it's our island. And that means that we get to exploit a whole bunch of area around it. So they tried to find it. And what do you know? It wasn't there. They couldn't find it. They tried to find it a whole bunch. They actually put a lot of resources into that because they really wanted to get to that oil, but they couldn't find it. So what happened to that island is the question. What do you think, Felix?
Well, so just to be sure, they thought there was an island. So there was information in the battle between the US and Mexico about this area, and then they thought, we've got an island over there. And then they were looking for the island, and there was no island over there.
And it wasn't there. And there was no island. So the island was mapped first in the 16th century somewhere. Okay. And it did. There are some corroborations of it, but not a lot of people actually, went there. Like I said, it wasn't really an important place. It was really small. So they didn't actually bother to check it for a long time, and they just forgot about it.
Okay. Well, probably I would think that the people that would have found that island in the 16th century, they put it down, and then probably it's going to be in a different island, like kilometers away. Probably that would be my first instinct.
So a cartography mistake, which is some kind of error from card makers. That is possible, but have you considered the more explosive option, in which the US, as you know, is a country with a lot of military power and also a lot of intelligence power. So they would know if that island was there. And they would also probably know that that oil is there a lot earlier than Mexico would, right? Because their agencies are a lot more on point than Mexico's. So let's just theorize that the US saw this little rock, this lump of rock, and thought that's really going to ruin our income. So what do?
Well, blow it up.
That's right. They bombed the shit out of it. Exactly.
I love this. I haven't heard of this one before. I love how you dug this one up on.
They actually tried to find it again in 2008, the Mexican government, and they could not. It's just not there anymore. If it ever was, there's really no conclusive evidence to show anything. And, the US does stand to benefit from this really tiny rock not being there.
I always say just follow the money, right? That's where the answer goes, right?
Yeah, so actually, does the United States have that area now to kind of exploit or not?
Well, the thing is they don't have the full area because they did have a dispute, and I think they did have to settle it with Mexico. But due to the whole UN Law of the Sea convention, if that island had been there, Mexico would have had a much stronger claim because it extends your exclusive economic zone. For the audience that don't know that much about the UN Law of the Sea, if you've got a little bit of land somewhere, everything around that, all the water around that is also technically part of your territory, and you get to get all of the stuff that is in the ground of that place. So getting that island would have been really nice for Mexico because that would have been a lot of oil money.
Yeah. Are you going to ask us now how much we believe this is a conspiracy or just in cartography oversight? Because normally I'm the one to do that, so I wanted.
Yes, So what do you think? What do you think, Simon? First,
I thought a nerve you asked. I'm definitely going to explosive option. it's a small island, and bombing tests and bombing targets, they were in high demand back in those days. They had a war to fight in Vietnam. Why not test a bomb and put it to use at the same time? That's
Do
all
you
I
think
say.
did you think that maybe they hydrogen bombed it?
I thought that was what you were going with initially when I'm like, oh, did they use it for a nuclear test
Oh,
site accidentally?
I should have gone for a nuclear option. Damn it! All right.
Yeah. But I think that would have been noticed. At least I hope that would have been
Yeah.
noticed by the Mexicans.
Yeah.
But
Anyway, Felix, how plausible do you think this is?
Well, it's going to be the first that I'm going to say that I have to agree with Simon in a way. A follow the money will probably be one of the biggest arguments to make this more plausible. But I reckon that even the states, they weren't. Well, I would like to believe that the states weren't that involved yet, or weren't that interested as well, and that Mexico dug up an old map of that area and thought, oh, we could possibly claim to it, and eventually it was not there. It was a mistake. As I just said, that someone made a mistake in 16th century. So I'll probably stick to that. But if there would be a lead of money or following the money, I could definitely see the point of of the Americans that have bombed it. That's for sure.
I mean, this is 1997. It's just before the internet is really kicking off big time, and the US is riding high that wave of having won the Cold War. So who knows?
Yeah, true.
what I want to know is why the Mexicans just didn't pretend the island actually existed.
Well, they tried, but in order to pretend an island exists, you actually have to show that it exists,
I guess so.
which
I
is going to
guess
be
so.
hard if there's nothing there.
True. Yeah, I guess the onus falls on them a little, but
It does. The burden of proof.
nah, should we move on to my first introduction?
Yeah, I think we should.
Oh, he's so excited.
So we were talking about adding some more intrigue, and I mean, let's come back to Earth a little from this foray into the galaxy of unknown, and I'm gonna present to you, instance of a place that doesn't actually exist, but probably does exist. And this is one of my favorite, random tidbits that happen in history. The story goes, it's July 1954, 56-ish, dates vary slightly. It's a bright sunny day at the Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan. A plane touches down. Smartly dressed man, he's going for customs. He's bearded, he looks all normal. Spoke Japanese a little, and he's also fluent in many other languages, French being his native tongue. And as he's going for customs, the Japanese officials, they're very thorough people. They ask to see his papers. And he hands them this passport that I'm showing on the screen right now. It's a passport from the United Kingdom of Taured, identifying him as a Taured citizen. But yeah, basically he handed them a passport of a country which they didn't believe existed.
Sounds like a loony, honestly.
But anyways, this man came through, and the Japanese, the thorough people, they're like, Taured does not exist. You have a passport which isn't a real passport. And this man is like, no, Taured exists. It's obvious exists. I know for sure. I'm a Taured citizen. I've lived in this country. This country's existed for over 1,000 years. I am a Taured citizen. And the Japanese were like, no, you're insane. It doesn't exist. And there's such a voracious argument that they're like, he can't just be doing this for a joke. So eventually they pull the map and they're like, yo, you're Taured man. Point out where it's Taured. And he points to where modern day Andorra is on a European map. The Japanese were like, that's Andorra, not Taured. And he's like, no, I've never heard this place called Andorra. This place is Taured. And so the Japanese, they didn't really know what to do with him. So they're like, well, we'll put him in jail for the night and then sort it out later. And they came back in the morning and they were shocked to see that out of the great Japanese judicial system, he had escaped his jail and run away. And that is the man from Taured. So there are a few explanations for this. And in my skeptic mind, the part of myself I hate when I go to sleep, I'm like, yeah, this might just be, a hoax as well. But when I started looking into it, there might be something behind it. And it's kind of insane. So the first explanation has to do with a man named John Allen Zegras. Allegedly, some accounts state that this man from Taured was actually a man named John Allen Zegras. So in the 1950s, wanted to travel all around the world. However, a lot of countries you couldn't travel as well to. So he thought, Why not make my own passport? Nobody checks passports anyways in the 1950s. I'll just make one that looks official enough. I'll go to the country, I'll show it off, and they'll just let me in, and I can do whatever. He decided to make up a fictional country, name it Taured, and had the capital of Taman Rasat. And he always said, when asked where it was, he'd say, south of Sudan was his typical answer. So basically he started traveling on the world in this fake passport until he got to Japan, and the Japanese were a bit too smart for him. What do you think of this explanation? Because, my initial response is always, it's the 1950s, yo. You could probably get away with making a fake passport and traveling around to, half the airports around the world.
Yeah, I actually think that is pretty accurate because, it's really hard to imagine now, but airport security and travel security was way less than it was now, especially with the amount of travel now and after 9/11, things have gotten way more tied down, and of course the records are much easier to find. So I think you could get away with making a passport like this. Honestly, most people don't know anything about the least bit about geography, so if you just make up a random name and say, well, of course it's there, and make a good con man, show a lot of confidence and do a bit of a con man thing, then you're probably going to get in.
Okay, well, if you're skeptical, I have two other explanations for this which get to a varying degree of what I would say believability. So the second one is a modification on the John Allen Ziegler story. So in this modification, they claim that he wasn't actually a kind-hearted, traveler of the world, a seer of sights, if you will. He was actually a spy for the United Arab Republic, which is a country which was an amalgamation of modern Syria and Egypt, which split up a while back. And it alleges that he wasn't held up at the airport either. Instead, he was trying to deposit a forged check at the bank. So when they caught him at the bank, he was like, yo, no, I am from this country called Taured. Please do not arrest me. I have totally legitimate business here. The Japanese didn't buy it. And, they sent him to prison, or they convicted him. So this man, John Allen Ziegler, according to this story, alleges that he was U.S. born, served in World War II. He later became an American spy serving in South Korea. He allegedly also had a South Korean wife with him at the time in Japan. And he eventually found his way over to the Arab Republic. I think he ran out of work for the Americans, and he started freelance spying for them, which is where he got to this unfortunate situation. What do you think about him being a spy instead? Does that explain some more of his suspicious behavior? Or is that too much of a tall tale?
I don't know. I think it's a spy story that I like spy stories, and this one sounds pretty nice. So I'm gonna want it. I'm gonna want to believe it. That's what I say. I like it.
Yeah. The funny tidbit to this one is that once he got arrested, the Japanese judicial system works pretty well. So he was sentenced to 1 year in prison. And immediately when he got the verdict, he tried to commit suicide while he was still in the courtroom, using a random piece of glass to try and cut his wrists in the courtroom, which is an extremely... Yeah, it's very odd. It's like, you couldn't have possibly thought that would have worked, right? Because Anyways, I don't want to get into it. I just thought that was hilarious. And it didn't work.
I feel like this man is I actually think he might be mentally ill.
That's not a bad...
Well, if he was a spy, he would have just had a canister of something good to kill himself, right? He's a spy. He's going to kill himself in a way that befits the spy instead of using a piece of broken glass, which is kind of pathetic.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, but anyways, he got sentenced to a year, and they deported him to Hong Kong afterwards, and he was never seen from again. My third explanation, I love this one because it ties it together so well. So, it was not actually a man from Taured with a D, but from Taureg with a G. So, are you familiar with modern-day Catalonia and the region of Catalonia in Spain?
Of course.
Yeah, so basically, in the 1950s, Catalonia was in a bit more of an autonomous state than it is today, and it was, it wasn't too much government. It was still a lot of government control, a lot of regime fighting, but, more free-moving people in the area. And one of those free-moving independent groups was a group of people who were ethnically Berbers, coming from around the Western Sahara region, and they ethnically were known as the Tuareg people, with a G, not a D. So allegedly, these Tuareg people, they were living in and around Catalonia, and Catalonia, as we know, is between France and Spain. If you point to the map and you land in between France and Spain, it's very feasible you could hit Andorra instead. So the way some of these Taured communities and as well as like the Catalonian communities worked is that a lot of these people often didn't interact with people outside of their own society. They were very locked off, very, closed-minded communities where nobody really left to do anything, partially because everybody was scared of the great, scary Franco who would kill you if he saw you looking at him the wrong way. So what some people think happened is that one of these communities, they really point to this town called Taured in a province of Loreda, which had existed for around 1,000 years. And they think that one of those communities decided, hey, one of our people are sick for some reason or something happened where they needed to go outside their community, go somewhere. However, they couldn't leave the country because they weren't naturalized Spanish citizens. They didn't have access to passports. So they think these people might have just got together, got their, smartest guy and given them a passport, which they told them, well, they have documents. This is a document. This must work the same way those passports work, except this passport was from Taured. And so this guy was shoved onto a plane, sent off to a country, and ended up being caught with a passport which he thought was legitimate from a country he had lived in for 1,000 years, and then was arrested for no reason, thrown into a jail cell, was frightened for his life because when people get thrown into jail cells under Franco, they tend not to escape the jail cells alive, and immediately disappeared. What do we think of this explanation? Because I kind of love it. Felix, go ahead if you want.
Yeah, I think it's far-fetched.
You think it's far-fetched?
It would explain the suicide with just a piece of broken glass, right? Because you're like, fuck, as soon as I get into that cell, I'm not going to get the opportunity anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, the suicide part isn't consistent across all tellings of the story, but yeah, I just think it just sums up his insistence that that country existed so much, because it did exist for him. I think that's such a beautiful way to tie it together.
Yeah, I get it, but I'm not buying it. That's the more point of it. This would probably be the one Simon would have thought about the most of how to perfectionize this one, and sounds more plausible. But I wouldn't, I wouldn't buy it.
I mean, the fourth explanation, Felix, and the fourth and final one, is that the man from Taured was actually from Taured, but traveled in a parallel universe and ended up in Japan instead, in our universe, where Taured was actually Andorra. So, I mean, that's my far-fetched explanation.
Well, I would buy that as a Trekkie.
You'd buy that one and not my... I feel like my tricks are not working here. But yeah. I guess to wrap up our Taured section, do we think Taured exists? Yes or no?
No.
No, I think it's a second Atlantis story.
Although I think the Cool Travelers is a cool explanation.
I think it might just be a con man. That's what I'm thinking. I think that wouldn't be the least plausible thing.
Okay, fair enough. Should we move on to your final lost place, Han?
Well, yeah. All right. So, guys, have you ever heard of Thule?
I've heard of it briefly, but I couldn't tell you what it was beyond an object or a place.
And you, Felix?
Yeah, that does say something.
Well, maybe as a Dutch person, you might have read a book about it, because Thea Beckman wrote a book about it, who also wrote a Kruistocht in Spijkerbroek. So that might be one of the reasons.
As a Dutch person, I could say it didn't come up in my education.
No. No,
away,
Simon. No.
Go back to Canada. Anyway, so Thule is actually one of the oldest mythical islands we still have. I think it's probably going to be around the same age, technically speaking, as Atlantis, as the Atlantis myth, because Atlantis was described by, I think Plato mentioned it. So this was first mentioned around 320 before Christ. So the gist of the story is that a man called Pythias of Massalia, which is modern-day Marseille — I found out that Marseille was actually founded by the Greeks, well, the more you know. He apparently wrote a treatise on his travels to Great Britain and the islands beyond ... His actual works were lost, but there's a lot of references to his works from other people whose work we do have access to. So this is not really much of a conspiracy, but it's honestly a really cool historical, mythical tidbit that I just wanted to discuss. So I'm just going to discuss some of the cool little facts about the island. So Thule is supposedly located to the north of Britain, like to the very far north, further than the Orkney Isles. And apparently there was some debate about whether this was even possible, because a historian, like 100 years later, a historian referenced Pythias' claims and said that it would be impossible to go to such a place, because if you go further north than the northern part of Great Britain, the sea, land, and air will actually turn into an impassable jellyfish-like consistency, which means you would not be able to go there physically with a boat. So that's one criticism on the account of Pythias, which I thought was pretty interesting. But basically, the island of Thule represents the end of the known world. So, and it still does in a lot of literature, actually. So, technically speaking, they did have some things right, and they also had some things wrong. Because Thule, the island, was actually described as having full days without sunlight and full days with no sunlight, which is actually a thing that happens. It's called midnight sun and polar night, which does happen in the very furthest reaches, which is interesting, the fact that they mentioned that, because apparently these ancient scholars did know about it, but they kind of misattributed it to this really weird place called Thule. Yeah, and it's been that people tried to pinpoint the location of the actual island Thule, but they kind of messed up a bunch of times. People thought it was going to be the Orkneys. They thought it was Greenland. They thought it was Iceland. People thought it was Norway, Sweden, or even Estland, which just blows my mind. How is Estland going to be the most northern part of anything? There's like a literal big part of continent right above it. Yeah, so that is the story of Thule. It's basically a bunch of accounts, but it's kind of been embedded into our cultural awareness of it, because it's been referenced a lot of time by authors and shit. So, for example, Thomas Cook, the cartographer and explorer, actually called the southernmost island he found on the south part of South America, he called it Southern Thule. So it does exist, and it is very far south, but it's not the same.
I mean, never say never, right? Because, I mean, we didn't discover Vinland, which the Vikings were obsessed about until the 1960s or so, right?
Well, Finland... Yeah, exactly. You come from Finland, technically.
No, I don't. Don't call me a Newfoundlander. Come on.
Come on.
It's I'm cooler than that.
You're from Canada. It's the same thing.
Yeah. No, I like the idea, you know.
So what do you think about this, Felix? About the whole Thule myth? Doesn't really...
Perhaps I missed it, but what was it? What was the time period? What was the year that they kind of brought it up?
So, like I said, it's a bunch of different accounts, but the first mention of it was 320 before Christ. So it's pretty dang old, and it's been like people have written about this up into the Middle Ages because they didn't actually have any means to verify what it was. Because honestly, the account of Pythias was lost pretty soon, I think. So they just had references of other people to work with, just like we're doing now.
I like the idea, I have to say. Then again, with your island in the beginning, that wasn't on the map. I would probably could think of it was a different island that they mistake for Thule or Thule.
Exactly. Interestingly, a lot of people say that Pythias was 100% full of shit and that he didn't actually travel to the Great Britain at all, which is, I think, the most interesting account is that just this Greek guy goes away for about a month or two from his hometown and comes back and he just tells all these great stories about this island and all the things he saw, but he actually just went and visited his grandma or something, which I think is a very human approach to things. I
mean, Thule, you know, the picture you have up right now, you know, it looks a bit like, you know, Urk, you know?
It does. I mean, I wish Urk was slightly further to the edges of the known world, but
well, you've lost you lost your listeners from Urk, that's for sure.
I don't think they have internet. They don't even have internet there.
Yeah,
and they don't speak English. That's fine.
See, I'm proving my Dutchness. I'm telling you. Come on. What would a non-Dutchman notice?
Plus, yeah, you get one Dutch point. And I have one final interesting fact, which is honestly a rabbit hole. And if anyone wants to research this and finds out anything cool about it, let me know, because I don't know about this. So, have you ever heard about the Thule Society? Either of you?
I have not,
No.
but I love secret societies. So okay,
Right.
go on.
So you're not going to love it as much because it is a secret society that was founded in 1918 Germany.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah,
retract my
and
previous statement.
they were occultists, and they were also high-ranking Nazis. So
Yeah,
the Nazis kind of had a thing with occultism, right? It's
yeah.
been explored in a lot of different things, a lot of different medias. It's actually true because the Nazis did have this weird obsession with occultism, and apparently the Thule Society was actually quite influential. I think Rudolf Hess was actually part of it. He was a pretty famous Nazi. Anyway, they had a theory about Thule, which is why they named it the Thule Society, and that is that Thule was the actual mythical birthplace of the Aryan race. That is where it came from. It came from this island.
No.
Yes, it was actually a thing. And interestingly, they theorized that this place, Thule, was actually the capital of a lost continent called Hyperborea.
I know they searched a lot for it. I mean, once we do our Antarctica episode, we'll know a lot more about this. That's all I'm going to say. But once we do our Antarctica episode, we'll mention this a bit more.
Yeah. But Hyperborea was basically a sort of paradise which is beyond a range of mountains, which is also non-existent or very mythical. So it's just this paradise-like place where apparently the Aryans came down and blessed the earth, which is just such a typical Nazi thing to think of. So yeah, that's the Thule Society. It was a Nazi thing as well.
It's interesting, gotta say. I mean, not that I approve in any means, but yeah.
Well, now you know. If you ever asked about the Thule Society or anyone wants you to join their secret society and they call it like that, then you know what to do. You gotta run.
Yeah.
Probably gonna turn out in their SS uniforms at some point.
Yeah, not good.
No.
Should we move on to our final little topic for today? Because we've been going for a while, so we'll go on to my last one. And you know, I'm somewhat of a North Americaner myself. You could call me that on certain days of the week. And North America has this, great love for the small town. And I mean, coming from a small town myself, I like small towns. They have a vibe to them, They have this feeling which you can't really replicate in Europe or the Netherlands especially. However, sometimes people, they have a favorite small town or a small town they have fond memories of, but they can't find it anymore. It's a town which they thought existed, but they doesn't really exist anymore, or just disappeared. So small towns do often close. So for instance, the town where I'm from, Rattlesnake Harbor, is no longer really a town anymore. It's basically just a little hamlet of 10 people because the general store closed like 20 years ago. Basically, once the general store closes in a small town, it's done for. And it's kind of been spreading around to other small towns around where I'm from too. And so, yeah, basically some small towns go out because not enough people live there. Sometimes, there's a natural disaster which wipes them out or makes them untenable to live in. And sometimes, people just misremember or forget that they actually existed. So some cool examples would be like Ashley in Kansas, Longville in Montana, Erkheimer in Iowa. These are all places which don't exist, but people think exist in their collective memories. These are not to be confused with paper towns, which are towns that map makers put on maps to confuse people, basically so that they have a copyright trap is what they call it. So the thing with maps is like you shouldn't copy a map from another map maker because you're stealing their material. So sometimes they put a fake town on the map just to make sure if you copy it, they're like, hey, yo, you copied my town. So a really famous one is called Agloe in New York, which doesn't exist, but it was on a map. So yeah. But the more nefarious cause for towns not existing is because the government does something wrong. ... Felix, do you know of any small town, or do you believe that some small towns just disappear sometimes? Is this something you can, stand by?
Well, yeah, 1953, the flood in the Netherlands, definitely some towns disappeared.
I forgot about that. I mean, yes, my collective memory really kicked in there.
Or what's the other one?
That's a good point.
What's the we had it in English class at high school? The village of the damned. That was a great story as well.
I mean, Pompeii too. I guess,
Pompeii too. Yeah.
Pompeii's just a city that just kind of.
No, those are interesting tidbits. So I want to start off by talking about a town which was destroyed because their own government was completely incompetent, which is hilarious. So there's a town called Centralia in Pennsylvania. Centralia. I have a picture up here of what it looks like today. It's very abandoned. So it had a population of 1,000 or so in 1980. 5 people live there today in 2017, and they're the ones who refuse to leave. All the other houses were basically torn down by the government. So, what do you think happened to this town in Pennsylvania? Any hypothesis, Han?
Nuclear disaster.
Wrong. Felix, any hypothesis?
Gas, explosion, something coming from the ground.
That's called Groningen, but no, wrong.
I'm sorry.
Anyways.
We're going to be keeping your ass warm until this war ends.
Well, we'll see about that. Anyways, so what happened? You're actually closer than you think, Felix. So Pennsylvania is known for being a good coal mining place. So they had a bunch of coal mines underneath Centralia, which were quite sizable. I think in the background of the picture, you can actually see some mining-like activity in the smaller picture. And what you do with old mine shafts, or old, mine shafts, which you don't want anymore. The people of Centralia, being great Americans, thought, well, we need a dump for our town. Why don't we just use the old mine shafts as a dump to dump all our junk and trash into? Cool idea, right, Han?
I'm not a geologist, but I feel like this is gonna fuck up your soil.
Partially. What was the bigger issue is that one of these mine shafts was close to a graveyard, and they were like, oh, we can't be dumping stuff near the dead people. So we should clear out this mine shaft we've been dumping stuff in for a while. So what they said is, okay, we know this is illegal, but under the table, we'll just get some firemen to burn it. Sound like a good idea, right?
Oh, no.
So they set fire to burn out the trash from the mine shaft. However, this fire turned into an uncontrolled fire very quickly. And guess what they mined there? Coal, which is flammable. So this entire mine facility underneath the entire town has a huge fire going in there, which is several hundred degrees Fahrenheit, which they could not get to turn out. And after a few days of trying, they're like, okay, we screwed up here. We're going to call an emergency, call the government. And they're like, what the hell did you guys do here? And they ended up evacuating most of the town and slowly trying to get everybody out. And it's still burning today. It's expected that this fire will continue to burn for another 250 years, making this town completely unlivable.
This is just going to increase the American CO2 emissions substantially, but this kind of stupid shit.
Yeah, it's so stupid. Anyways, you can even there's cracks in the road where smoke rises out of from the burning from underneath the ground. It's insane.
But is it, just to be realistic here, is it a conspiracy?
No, I'm warming you up for my next conspiracy. I just thought this is too good not to include. This is the pinnacle of because I mean, Felix, you're an aspiring, somewhat of a bureaucrat yourself, as I've always pictured you as that type. So
wrong.
Don't do this, is all I say.
Wrong. That's so
anyways, have either of you ever heard of a town that goes by the name of Doveland, Wisconsin?
I have not. Again.
Okay. Neither do I.
So the thing about Doveland is it's a town a lot of people remember existing. And when I say a lot of people, if you ask a person in Wisconsin if they know of Doveland, a lot of them will say, yes, I've driven past it. Yes, I picked up a t-shirt there once. Yes, I've seen it. Somebody's told me about it. It's really ingrained within the Wisconsinites that Doveland existed. It was alleged to be more of a roadside stop, smaller town, but Doveland existed. However, since the 1980s or 90s, nobody can find Doveland on any map or on anything whatsoever. And the scary thing is that it's a really big group of people who are not connected who do genuinely put forth Doveland exists. It's not some kind of hoax. People think it exists. So why did it disappear? Why do people think this way? The first explanation is the easy one, which is it's just a Mandela effect of something people collectively think they remember. This is also related to some explanations that there was a shift in the parallel universes and this town just disappeared. Others say it just never existed. It was just some kind of hoax. And others say maybe it did exist and people just moved out and it just disappeared, but that doesn't explain why it just completely disappeared. Any of these reasons, tickling your fancy for either of you?
I feel like it might just be a thing that rises naturally between people. I'm not rural, all right? I don't know how rural people think. You should be able to tell me that, but I feel like it's just something that might happen in places like that. If there's so many little villages, you're like, oh yeah, I've visited that one, I think, probably.
It's a weird thing that a lot of independent people claim exists.
Well, are they asked if they've been to Doveland, or are they like, yeah, I was in Doveland yesterday? Do they mention it on their own, or
no? It's more of I remember having been to Doveland because, and then they're like, Doveland exists, right? And then they're shown to a map, and they're like, where the hell is Doveland? It's a weird thing. What do you think, Felix?
I come from a rural area. Simon knows it. He has been there. I know quite a couple of villages, or kind of
rural.
Oh, okay. Compared to your Canadian woodhouse, definitely not a rural area.
Log cabin.
But I remember me going to little villages that were either just one street or something in the Netherlands, or possibly shout out, yeah, I've been there. And then mostly I felt sorry for the guys that were living there and had to go to school in a different city and had to cycle for longer than an hour, 2 hours. But I could believe that.
Okay. Well, the explanation I'm pulled towards myself is a very obscure one. And it's of a rumor that this town disappeared completely after existing due to a government experiment going wrong. And there's some meat behind these bones. So basically what they allege happened is this government experiment went wrong, killed most of the people in the town, and they covered it up to avoid mass, outrage or to protect their secrets. So I've actually found the project which they allege happened there too. During the Cold War, in the late 1960s or so, they had this problem where they had these nuclear submarines under the ocean. And once it's under the ocean, you can't contact them. If they're so far deep under the ocean, you can't send a radio wave to get to them. There's no way to tell. And that kind of is an issue when you're trying to work on a doctrine of mutually assured destruction, where if Russia launches nukes against America, these subs have to pop up and be like, oh, now I have to fire my nukes. But if they can't get a message, they don't know to pop up and fire those nukes. So America was like, yo, we need a better kind of stronger radio wave tower to send out messages to submarines to pop up and shoot nukes. The issue is the only radio frequency thing that would work is called an ALF frequency, or an extremely low frequency. But the problem with this is that you need a really large receiver to send this out, and you also need, to hide it somewhat, because it'd be like the first target in any kind of strike on your country. So this resulted in Project Sanguine, which allegedly happened from the late 1960s all the way into the late 1980s. So the idea was, and stick with me here, some amazing American official was like, yo, what if we turned 2/5 of the state of Wisconsin into a massive radio receiver? It's a great idea, I have to admit.
We should have asked Kelsey on this podcast. I wonder what she has to say. She lives in Wisconsin.
She's from Iowa, isn't she?
Oops. It's the same place anyway.
And you've lost your listeners from Iowa.
Also Wisconsin.
Anyways. But no, it's insane. They were like, we're legit turning this half the state into a radio receiver. And their plan was actually quite feasible to do it. So how they would do it is that they would insert a giant antenna of nearly 10,000 kilometers of cable into a grid covering about 58,000 square kilometers, which would serve as a giant antenna, which is kind of built into kind of a rock under Wisconsin. And this could survive a nuclear strike because it's so large and underground. And it could also send out these radio transmissions, which was a one-way transmission which could hit the submarine. They'd like, yo, a message. They'd pop up, get the message, and then send out their nukes if they had to or something like that. So it would all work well and fine, except it was really expensive. And people didn't really like, the idea of the government ripping apart half of the state of Wisconsin to throw cables into it. So, theoretically, it was axed. However, the rumor goes it wasn't axed. And the town of Doveland was near some kind of dam, and the United States government accidentally broke the dam and flooded the entirety of Doveland, killing off most of the people and wiping the town off the map. And that's it.
So how inbred was this town that nobody ever thought to visit? Like, nobody left this town or something? Did nobody have dead relatives?
It's a small town. I don't know. The government could have just been like, oh, your dearly beloved one accidentally got killed in a roadside crash or something, Happens all the time.
My entire family got killed in a roadside crash, including my aunts and uncles.
If there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
It's feasible. This could have happened.
It was a big bus.
It was they all went on a family trip and they didn't invite you because it was going to be a surprise for your birthday, and then they all crashed. Everyone.
I mean, yeah, it does explain why Doveland suddenly disappeared.
Yes. I think random random comment works too.
Well, all of us here are Dutch, and the idea of dams breaking, that should put some credence to this theory,
We don't have breaking dams. We don't look. We did that one time. We don't do it anymore.
Okay.
Like, we actually learn from our mistakes instead of you guys.
Well, what do we think about Doveland? Are we sold on it being an accidental government calamity which disappeared this town into non-existentness, or is it just a parallel dimension?
Yeah, America is a big country, really big country. So in the bloody middle of somewhere of America, it could happen, but it's no. The fact that I said the rural area would say, yeah, people from rural areas would say, yeah, I know the place and stuff like that, but there should be more linked. There should be more discoveries of either a documentary that should have come out or another podcast. Even now, especially in COVID times, people.
This is a podcast.
Oh yeah, no, this is a podcast, but someone would have figured it out already. So no, I'm not buying it.
And you, Han, it's your final chance to buy into my theory for today. Come on.
I'm not buying into this one. I'm sorry. I'll buy into. I bought into the first one, I think. Right. So that's what you get.
I just love the idea that they thought their answer to their problem of communicating in subs was to turn half of the state into a big antenna. It's so ludicrous.
That is, but the thing is, it's so insane. But then again, this was the Cold War. People they were scared shitless. They would do some very, very silly things to actually make sure that everything went all right. If you look at the Second World War, there were things like they had so many weird inventions that were so insane, but they actually explored it. Like the whole mind control thing of MK Ultra as well. That's like, how do you even think of that?
Yeah. Han, you mentioned you want to do one final theory, quick one before we wrap up.
Yes. I want to do one, and this is for our maybe like one or two German listeners because they'll know it. So has any one of you ever heard of the town of Bielefeld in Germany?
No.
How about you, Simon?
I am not German.
Do you know Berlin?
I've been there once.
Exactly. So just because you're not German doesn't mean you don't know a German town. That's stupid.
Okay, sure.
Anyway, so Bielefeld is supposed to be a place with about 300,000 civilians. So it's a pretty big city. But there is this half conspiracy theory and half joke, which arose in the 1990s, which is just typical German humor in that the theory is that the city doesn't exist. It's just not there. And it's actually been a running gag for so long that the city of Bielefeld actually got a bounty, like put out a bounty for 1 million euros to prove that the city does not exist.
One way to do it.
Yeah, so
Didn't Merkel herself say it didn't exist? I think I remember reading that somewhere.
yeah, I don't. I feel like that might be misinformation. I don't know. It is a long running joke though. It's been around since like the early internet. So, but yeah, apparently it's either a CIA, a government, a Mossad, or an alien plant. Choose your pick.
Anyways, we should start wrapping up real quick then. I'll turn off my camera just in case this might help your internet, Felix. But yeah, we'll start wrapping up right now. And just to wrap up, Felix, do you want to give any lessons you've learned today? Any insights? Any random tidbits that you're taking away from our beautiful conversation we had?
Well, one thing is for sure that Simon is still a person that you don't have to trust. He's making a lot of bullshit still, he does. And even he's so good in it that he can even provide you with a multiple choice answer in that sense. No, realistically, I think I've only heard about one of them. And I have to say, it was quite enlightening because you've never thought about these conspiracy theories about different planets, different islands, different countries. So that was actually quite interesting. But, well, except for the fact that I'm a Trekkie, I wouldn't buy most of the stories. Either lunatics, Atlantis 2.0, or things that we haven't spotted, like planets that only pass by once in 10,000 years. So I would for the last one, that I just mentioned, 10,000 years of a planet, I would leave the door open a bit. For the others, and the island on the map. The map, I will definitely grant that one.
Okay. No, I just know that one day in our future, you're gonna wake up, Felix. You're gonna check your news app or something, and you'll be like, "Random ninth planet discovered. Great government conspiracy that killed this small town in America. Oh no, Simon told me about this," and I'll just be sitting here with a smoke.
Yeah, but the difference is that you're always having a smirk on your face, so that's not a new thing.
What about you, Han? Do you want to give any final insights, any lessons you learned as well here, or any places you now newly discovered and want to travel to?
Well, I kind of rediscovered my interest in mythological islands and places. I spent the last few days reading up on random ass places, which it's not really a conspiracy. It's just cool. The way that people used to look at the world was a lot more magical.
Yeah.
Like the story I told about that guy that said, no, you couldn't have gone to that island all the way up north. There is no way, because the air and the ground are made of jelly. You wouldn't be able to go there. Ba-bam. Logic. It's just the fact that you can say something like that and write it down and not be just completely destroyed as a crackpot. I wish we were back in those days. The world would seem so much more magical. There could be a dragon around that corner, and that's nice.
Yeah, I agree. Because a lot of these stories, like even like the small town ones, they just rely on the allure of like a time that's begone to us, right? Like in this internet age, like we could throw up Google Maps and point to any like thing, right? But here it's like, it just relies on narrative, on tales of people and interactions people have, which is, I mean, hell, I would love to travel the world in a made-up passport just to feel cool, but we'll see. Well, any final goodbyes you guys want to say to the kind audience? And thank you so much for listening in if you listened all the way through. And I want to thank, Han and Felix, of course, for braving their illnesses to join us. So, yeah, I hope you guys had a good time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks, guys. It's great fun.
Yeah. Well, now we're going to, pack our luggage and head off to an exotic locale, which is of undisclosed origin at the moment. You'll catch us sometime in the future. So, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.